This is lecture number 50 in the ABCs of Communism series, which accompanies the textbook, The ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2017 this time. This chapter will be chapter 67 in that book when you get it, which will be available somewhere around the first of the year. Now, this is a lecture on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, another one in that series. And this time we're talking about the Hu Jintao administration, which went on from 2002 to 2012. Now, Hu Jintao himself was born on the 21st of December of 1942 in Taizhou, Jiangsu province. His branch of the family migrated there from Jizi County, Anhui, during his grandfather's generation. Though his father owned a small tea trading business in Taizhou, the family was relatively poor. His mother was a school teacher and died when he was 7 years old, and he was raised by an aunt. Now, in April 1964, Hu joined the Communist Party of China, which makes him a kind of age mate of mine. I joined the Communist Party USA in Oregon in 1963, a year before. At any rate, he began to work as an engineer in July '65 after he graduated from the Water Conservancy Engineering Department at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Now there he had a major in the study of hub hydropower stations and a minor in geology. During his time at Tsinghua, he met his wife, Liu Yongqing, and in 1968 he volunteered for his obligatory national service in Gansu province. There he worked on the construction of the Linjia hydroelectric station while managing party affairs for the local branch of the Ministry of Water Resources and Electric Power. From 1969 to 1974, Hu worked for the Sino Hydro Engineering Bureau as an engineer, and accordingly he was excellently trained to oversee the completion of the South-North Water Diversion project from the Yangtze River to Beijing while he was president of the PRC in 2002-2012. Now in 1973, Hu transferred to the construction department of Gansu as a secretary, and in 1974 he was promoted to vice senior chief. In 1980, Deng Xiaoping, then at the beginning of his administration, implemented the Four Transformations program. He wanted to find in the CPC ranks those communist leaders who were more revolutionary, younger, and more knowledgeable and more specialized. In response to this nationwide search for young party members with leadership potential, Song Ping, the first secretary of the party Gansu Gubernatorial Committee, that is, the governor of Gansu province, in other words, put forward Hu Jintao's name. Governor Song was so impressed with Hu's work, he promoted him several ranks to the position of deputy head of the Gubernatorial Commission, what we would call lieutenant governor. Now, another protege of Song, Wen Jiabao, also became prominent at the same time, which is important because when Hu becomes president, Wen is going to become his prime minister. In 1982, Hu was promoted to the position of Communist Youth League of the Gansu branch secretary, and shortly thereafter Hu was appointed director of the All China, that is the National Youth Federation. His mentor, Song Sing, transferred to Beijing as Minister of Organization, the organizational secretary, in other words, of the Communist Party of China, and as such he was in charge of senior cadres' recommendation, candidacy, and promotion. With Hu Yaobang, no relation, Deng Xiaoping, and Song Ping backing him, Hu Jintao was on his way up. In 1982, Central Party authorities invited Hu Jintao to Beijing to study at the Central Party School, and soon after he was transferred to Beijing and appointed as secretary of the Communist Youth League Central Commission. 2 years later, he was made head, or first secretary, of the CY Central, and during his term in the Youth League, Hu escorted Hu Yaobang, who was CPC General Secretary at that time, in visits around the country. Hu Yaobang himself, a veteran coming from the Youth League, could reminisce with Hu Jintao about their experiences in what might roughly be thought of as the Eagle Scouts of China. In 1985, then Communist Party General Secretary Hu Yaobang pushed for Hu Jintao to be transferred to Guizhou as the Provincial Committee Secretary of the CPC, and it was made so. Hu solved the economic problems of what was then a backwater province, like Idaho in the USA, and in the course of his work there he demonstrated his willingness to get down and dirty, visiting all of the 86 counties. While in Guizhou, Hu was careful to follow Beijing's directives and had a reputation of being, quote, airtight, unquote. He was a manager's manager and rarely offered personal views on policy in public. Hu was publicly perceived as an official with integrity and honesty. Now, in 1987, Hu Jintao handled a local students' protest, similar to the Democracy Wall protest in Beijing, quite successfully. In Beijing, similar protests resulted in Hu Yaobang's forced resignation, but Hu Jintao's carefully handled situation led to his national recognition for competence. Now, Tibet versus the CIA. When Hu Yaobang was forced out of national office, Hu Jintao also drew criticism from party elders for failing to criticize the ousted reformer. However, the other side of that coin was loyalty, and that is a trait as valuable in communist politics as anywhere else, and it just takes some time to sink in and be evaluated when all other things prove themselves equal. Now, in 1988, Hu transferred to become Party Regional Committee Secretary of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, while also taking on the role of political commissar of the local People's Liberation Army units. This made Hu effectively the #1 figure in the vast region that was Tibet. It was a chance to prove himself again. Now, reactionary Tibetan families had long opposed PRC government policy in the autonomous region. Secret agents from CIA and MI6 had infiltrated their old stomping ground in Tibet with the aim of stirring up unrest and ethnic conflict, and they tried to generate anti-Han Chinese racism among susceptible segments of ethnic Tibetan society. And minor clashes had been going on there since 1987. Hu arrived the next year in 1988 and took charge of the campaign to eradicate the spies and their compradors. In February of 1989, Hu deployed 1,700 People's Armed Police into Lhasa. Clashes with MI6 and CIA agents culminated in serious rioting in Lhasa when the spies mobilized their witting and unwitting compradors on the 5th of March of '89. They had chosen this date to challenge the government because it was only 5 days before the 30th anniversary of the 1959 CIA-MI6 organized Tibetan uprising. The armed police said they opened fire in self-defense when fired upon. Hu delayed further orders to clamp down on the protesters until late in the evening that day, and then Hu knew he had to act because the situation was spiraling out of control, and the protesters were vanquished early on the next day, March 6th of '89. Hu then asked Beijing to declare martial law, and on 8th of March 1989 it was made so. Now, the foreign spies were highly pissed off at their failure in Tibet, where they expected their chances were the greatest. But they soon forgot about Tibet when they saw the opportunity that their colleagues created 3 months later in Beijing on the 4th of June 1989 in the Tiananmen Square incident. When the party decided to put an end to the CIA ploy and send in the PLA, it was Hu's earlier decision to do the same thing in Lhasa, if necessary, with the PLA troops stationed in Chengdu that was their model. In 1989, Hu's actions in Lhasa earned him the attention of Deng Xiaoping. Then, as tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square, Hu publicly declared his support for the central authorities. He experienced high-altitude sickness the next year in June 1990 and had to return to Beijing, but remained in his position as boss of Tibet for another 2 years. But he was on his way up. Before the opening of the 14th National Congress of the CPC in 1992, senior party leaders, including Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yun, selected candidates for the Politburo Standing Committee, ensuring a smooth transition of power from the second-generation leaders, for example, Deng Xiaoping, Chen Yun, Li Zinan, Wang Zhen, to third-generation leaders Jiang Zemin, Li Ping, was of paramount importance. Dong considered another candidate for a further future transition, preferably someone under 50, to represent the next generation of leaders. And Song Ping, as the organizational chief, recommended Hu Jintao as an ideal candidate for the prospect of a future leader. Thus, shortly before his 50th birthday, Hu Jintao became the youngest member of the 7-member Politburo Standing Committee. In 1992, Hu took charge of the Secretariat of the Communist Party of China, which oversaw day-to-day operations of the Central Committee and the Central Party School, and Hu took charge of the ideological work of the CPC. Now, accordingly, Hu was heir apparent to Jiang Zemin. However, he always took great care not to be in the spotlight. In late 1998, Hu promoted Jiang's already unpopular movement in the party of the 3 stresses: stress study, stress politics, and stress healthy ends, and giving speeches to promote it. In 2001, he publicized Jiang's 3 represents theory, equally unpopular in the party, and in 1998, Hu became Jiang's vice president of China. Jiang wanted Hu to play a more active role in foreign affairs, and he became the leading voice of China during the NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999. Now, on the 15th of November 2002, a new Hu Jintao-led Politburo succeeded Jiang Zemin. Jiang, then 76, stepped down from the powerful position of General Secretary and from the Politburo Standing Committee. In 2003, Jiang was also re-elected to the post of the chairman of the Central Military Commission of the CPC. Now, as we have seen, this had become an established way of being sure that a Gorbachev great traitor type could not succeed even if one should get to be the head of party and government. Secure hands retaining military power just in case. Deng Xiaoping had appointed CPC general secretaries, all of whom were designed to be successors, and he had been instrumental in the ousting of 2 of them, Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang. His third and final selection, Jiang Zemin, won Deng's continued backing, and Jiang Zemin was the first general secretary in Communist Chinese history to voluntarily leave his post at the end of his term. Now, Hu was originally handpicked by Deng as the youngest member of China's top leadership and as a leading candidate to succeed Jiang. Along his way, Hu had exercised a great deal of political skills between 1992 and 2002. Thus, he consolidated his position and eventually emerged as Jiang's heir apparent in his own right. Hu was the paramount leader of China between 2002 and 2012. He held the offices of General Secretary of the Communist Party from 2002 to 2012, President of the People's Republic from 2003 to 2013, and Chairman of the Central Military Commission from 2004 to 2012. He was a member of the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th CPC Politburo Standing Committees. Now, just to summarize this, for most of his career, Hu was a functionary in the CPC. Importantly, he was party secretary in his Guizhou province and the Tibet Autonomous Region, and later first secretary of the Central Secretariat and vice president under former president and party leader Jiang Zemin, who was the first leader of the Communist Party without a history in the Long March and the armed struggle of the Civil War. It was inevitable, of course, that as the CPC held long-term political power, that a next generation would have a new kind of history. Now, during his term in office, Hu oversaw growing government control of the overall economy. Along with his colleague, Premier Wen Jiabao, Hu presided over a decade of intense economic growth, technological innovation, and development. The space program and the cinematic industry being examples well known to the world, and 2 of the 6 I've chosen to talk about in the latter part of this lecture. And China became a major world power who improved socioeconomic equality domestically through the scientific development concept, building a harmonious socialist society, prosperous and free of social conflict. Now, Hu followed revolutionary socialism with Chinese characteristics policies. Enemies felt the weight of state power that crushed CIA attempts to create social disturbances, ethnic minority protests, and their creation, quote-unquote, the dissidents. On foreign policy, Hu advocated China's peaceful development, throughout Hu's tenure, China increased its outreach to Africa, Latin America, and Oceania, as well as Asia proper. Hu was personally quiet and studious as a man. His tenure was characterized by collective leadership and consensus-based rule. These traits made Hu a low-key figure in the public eye, embodying China's focus on hard work and the technocratic competence. Hu retired in 2013 and was succeeded by Xi Jinping, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. Now, since taking over as General Secretary of the Central Committee at the 16th National Congress of the CPC, Hu and his Premier Wen Jiabao proposed to set up a harmonious socialist society. Such a model meant less inequality and improving the GDP first and welfare second policies. Now, they focused on sectors of the Chinese population left behind by the economic rebuilding, and accordingly they took many journeys to the poorer areas of China. Hu and Wen Jiabao moved China away from favoring economic growth over social imperatives. Their balanced view of growth now took social inequality and environmental damage as equally important to industrialization and agricultural modernization. Something emphasized was green, gross domestic product usage at the domestic household level. Just a side comment real quickly, because I don't want to get too far from the script. The party standing committee was responsible, along with the entire Central Committee, for setting up these 10-year presidencies, each one of which would solve a set of problems, each one of which would create certain problems which would have to be solved successively. So you want to keep that in mind when we're talking about what was accomplished by this particular administration. Now, they had what they call the SARS crisis, you might remember SARS, in 2003. It was a disease called SARS, which there was an outbreak, and Hu and Wen demanded an end to covering up, and they demanded fast response to field and press reports. So party and government officials were fired, including the health minister and the mayor of Beijing, Meng Zhonong, Hu's protege. His succession was complete in 2004. The entire succession went very smoothly, it was very orderly, and that's a trend that will continue, we know, because it's been one of the party's stated major goals. 10-year terms, and then a transition to a new guy, or a new person, could easily be a woman. Now, Jiang resigned as chairman of the Central Military Commission in September 2004, his last official post, following Jiang's stepping down. Hu had officially taken on 3 institutions of the People's Republic of China: party, government, and state. In communist terms, there are always 3 elements here: the Communist Party, its government, and its state apparatus, the state meaning the military and the police. And in modern times, of course, the police are somewhat expanded to include this vast national intelligence system, international as well. Well, Hu had become the paramount leader, at any rate, when the Central Military Commission post went to him in 2004. And the next time around, when Xi Jinping is going to be president, he's going to take all 3 positions immediately, which shows that the party has complete confidence that it's chosen the right people, and they don't need to worry about keeping the guns in separate hands, giving the new guy time to prove himself. So, at any rate, I'm just making that as another side comment. I don't want to get too far off here, because I've got a lot of material to cover. Now, what did President Hu and Premier Wen inherit? Well, they inherited a lot of social, political, and environmental problems. This was expected. The biggest problem was the large wealth disparity between Chinese rich and poor, and the party's own propaganda line fueled discontent and anger. The cronyism and corruption plaguing China's civil service, military, educational, judicial, and medical systems had to go now, and it had to go fast. So this was part of what they knew was going to happen because of the steps they'd taken previously. Now, in January of 2006, Hu launched the 8 Honors and 8 Shames movement, which formalized the decision to promote more selfless and moral outlook in the party of the entire nation. In October 22nd of 2007, at the 17th National Congress, Hu was reelected as General Secretary of the Central Committee and Chairman of the CPC Central Military Commission. And then on March 15, 2008, at the 11th People's Congress, Hu was reelected as President and also reelected as Chairman of the PRC Central Military Commission. Now, scientific outlook on development. This is Hu's political philosophy. And during his leadership, he thought it could be summarized by three slogans. First, a harmonious socialist society domestically. This slogan materialized in the second slogan, the scientific development concept. That concept integrates sets of solutions to arrays of economic, environmental, and social problems and recognizes in inner circles a need for a cautious and gradual political reform. Secondly, the scientific development doctrine written into the Communist Party and state constitutions in 2007 and 2008 respectively. The role of the party has changed as formulated by Deng Xiaoping and implemented by Jiang Zemin from a revolutionary party to a ruling party. Revolutionary in that sense meaning a party involved in armed struggle. Now, Hu continued the party's modernization, calling for both advancement of the party and its increasing transparency in governance. And third, a peaceful development internationally. Now, this is not peaceful coexistence of the modern revisionist ilk. This is not saying that there could be peaceful coexistence between the capitalist class and the working class, which of course is impossible. What peaceful development means simply is that China, with regard to all other countries, regardless of social systems, will seek to develop cooperatively and thus peacefully. In the view of the Chinese party and its government, these slogans create a new China model as an alternative to imperialism's democracy model. In Hu's words, a harmonious socialist society should feature democracy, the rule of law, equity, justice, sincerity, amity, and vitality. Such a society will give full scope to people's talent and creativity, and it will enable all people to share the social wealth brought by industrial development and agricultural modernization, and it forges an ever closer relationship between the people and their government. Hu's agenda had two central pillars: maintaining social stability to further economic development, and two, sustaining Chinese culture to enrich national sovereignty. In domestic policy, openness to the public on governmental functions and meetings was promoted. Xinhua, China's news agency, began publishing the details of Politburo Standing Committee meetings. Hu canceled events he saw as communist extravaganzas. Hu focused on the gap between rich and poor and uneven development between the interior and coastal regions, something that they knew was going to happen, and now they had to begin to deal with it. In 2004, Hu stopped the tradition of going to the Bedai seaside retreat for their annual summer meeting. It set the wrong example to everyone involved and to the nation. Communists should extol personal sacrifice and prudent behavior among the cadre. Certainly, they should not engage in any unnecessary waste of public funds, and the Chinese public saw this decision as symbolic of Hu's attitude towards corruption. And then in June of 2007, Hu gave an important speech at the Central Party School where he appealed to ordinary Chinese, making serious note of what the party was doing to end income disparity. On the issue of Taiwan, I don't want to spend too much time, just summarize that real briefly. There was for a moment a period when the incoming president was reluctant to stick with the 1992 consensus reached by Taiwan and the PRC, where their relations got to the point where it was possible that the PRC would have to militarily take over Taiwan, which they didn't want to have to do. But the Kuomintang Party, the KMT, won the election, the next in Taiwan, and there were visits between the two, and for the moment anyway, everything had returned to normal. And having said that much, I'm going to move on beyond Taiwan, because in his administration, things started out poorly with the CIA trying to pull Taiwan away from the 1992 consensus, and then they haven't gotten the whole thing figured out. In 2010, there was a formalization by treaty of all of this business. However, the U.S. ruling families demonstrated their intention to interfere, having their House Negro Obama talk about a U.S. pivot to Asia. Well, moral guidance. In March 2006, as we've seen, Hu Jintao released the 8 honors and 8 shames as a set of moral codes to be followed by Chinese people, and emphasized the need to spread that message among youth. Hu's contribution to Marxist theory now is an important point to make, because within China's context, it's very important. It has a general applicability, however, beyond that, because problems arising from growing broad-spectrum public affluence of the bourgeois type have been created in all of the socialist countries. So, in promotion, this whole idea of how they're going to deal with it was very important, and it was visible everywhere, from classroom posters to banners on the street and in electronic display boards for the preparation of the 2008 Olympics and the World Expo 2010 in Shanghai, the first of which I'll mention as one of the 6 examples of what was going on during this particular period of time. But at any rate, he made an important contribution to Marxist theory, because he said we've got to deal with this growing broad-spectrum public affluence of the bourgeois type, and it's not something that's going to go away, not until we establish true communism. Now, Hu's administration presided over a decade of nearly incredible economic growth. Under his government, China easily weathered the 2008 global financial crisis unscathed, and naturally this increased China's Marxism and its international stature. Hu's tenure is credited with modernizing China's infrastructure, the launch of China's first manned spaceships, and the success of 2 foregoing international events, the Beijing Olympics of 2008 and the 2010 Shanghai Expo. Ultra-leftist groups in the imperialist countries and in imperialist-dependent countries continued uninformed, completely misunderstanding what was happening in China, their Marxism accordingly exposed for its own primitiveness. Hu Jintao, Premier Wen Jiabao's policies resulted in the elimination of agricultural taxes for farmers and more flexible policies toward formerly farming migrant workers living in cities. The time had come to address the imbalance between rich provinces and poor ones, and Hu and Wen did so, bringing more balanced development between the coastal regions and the interior, and they enforced minimum wages in cities and the promotion of sustainable and affordable housing development, and the response to the Tsar's public health crisis, and that resulted in a massive expansion of health insurance coverage for middle to low income citizens that has earned the party renewed loyalty among the masses. And I noticed this morning Xi Jinping says now they're going to cover the entire country. At any rate, China's internal security budget exceeded its military budget during Hu's tenure. Constant CIA MI6 provocations were responsible. The Hu administration's ability to rein in the wealth gap and its renewed emphasis on the role of state-owned enterprises, SOEs, in the economy helped reduce the gap. Hu's tough on corruption policies increased transparency in the expenditures of official organs and bureaucrats, and in his departing speech at the 18th Party Congress, Hu emphasized the potentially devastating effects that unchecked corruption would have on the party and the country. Entrenched corruption in the military would continue until the succeeding Xi administration. But his outgoing speech is meant to set the tone. The Standing Committee has known that this kind of corruption was inevitable, especially given their creation of these special economic zones, and that they would inevitably have to deal with it, and that's become the first focus of the new administration, and they're doing a pretty good job. Consensus-based decision-making became a hallmark of the Hu era. Hu was never a strongman, did not rule by fiat, and was first among equals with his Politburo Standing Committee colleagues. Within the context of the system, he performed extremely well. The policy of opening new and innovative technological programs, both for their own sake and to alleviate unemployment arising from the closing of inefficient SOEs continued, and the following are some examples, and I selected 6. The first is the space program. And remember, there are thousands of new programs going on in this 10-year period all over China, so it was hard to select just 6, but I tried to select the 6 which were most massive and that you most likely will have heard of. The space program was to adapt military technology and development since the revolution succeeded in '49 to civilian purposes, namely 1. The exploration of space for scientific and human usage, 2. The stimulation of science and technology in general in the PRC, which would ultimately come from such a vast undertaking, 3. Create another new source of technological innovation, which Marxist theory tells us is the only way to absorb the massive amounts of surplus value being created by automated, cyberneticized industry and mechanized agriculture, and 4. Offset unemployment caused by the closure of inefficient SOEs. Just for a brief historical background on this, you may recall that the first ICBM launch of the PRC occurred in May 1980. It went 5,600 miles into the South Pacific Ocean, where its payload was retrieved 5 minutes later by a helicopter, and China could no longer be bullied by U.S. imperialism because it had MIRVed thermonuclear warheads for sea-based and land-based ICBMs. MIRV stands for Multiple Independently Targeted Reentry Vehicles. In other words, every payload on every ICBM might have 10, might have 20 warheads, each one independently targeted toward a different place. Now they had them too, and at any rate, the gringos were very busy getting the spoils of their subversion of the USSR via the great traitor Michael Gorbachev. Now, further development of the Long March rocket series allowed the PRC to initiate a commercial launch program in 1985, and then China launched satellites for over 30 foreign-owned and built satellites, and mostly those from European and Asian companies. In March of 1986, an even more ambitious crewed space program was Astronautics Plan 863, and this and a subsequent plan would ferry crews to and from the space station, and the subsequent plan was called Project 921, which we'll take a closer look at now. In 1991, the Jiang Zemin administration authorized funding for the first phase of this crewed spaceship Project 921, called Shenzhou. And the Shenzhou program had 4 uncrewed test flights and 2 crewed missions. In November 20th, 1999, for the 50th anniversary of the PRC's founding, China launched the Shenzhou 1 and recovered it after a flight of 21 hours. And on January 9th, 2001, Shenzhou 2 launched, carrying test animals. In 2002, the incoming Hu Jintao Wenjiabao administration oversaw the launch of Shenzhou 3 and Shenzhou 4 that carried test dummies. Then in October 2003, China's first crewed mission, that is a mission with the crew, took off for space and was captained by Yang Liwei on Shenzhou 5. Captain Yang and his crew in orbit for 21 hours, making China the 3rd nation to launch a human into orbit. In 2004, the Shenzhou 6 flight ended the first phase of the Project 921, and these missions were all launched on a Long March 2F rocket from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. The China Crewed Space Engineered Office provided engineering and administrative support for the crewed Shenzhou missions, and China has since turned its focus to extraterrestrial exploration, starting with the Moon. The first Chinese lunar exploration program, Uncrewed Lunar Orbiter Chang'e-1, was successfully launched on October 24th, 2007, and making China the 5th nation to successfully orbit the Moon. Now, there's the period of the space laboratory and the space station. I go through all of those details. This is a continuation of Project 921, first flight of which is called Shenzhou 7, but I don't think I need to do anything here except to point out that a space laboratory was built, and a second one was also built, and a space station was planned as the last phase of this Project 921, and it will be in space by 2020, and then I go through all the details. It's a pretty large sucker. So anyway, In space exploration, they went through steps. Project 921, Shenzhou spacecraft. Project 921-2, the X-11 spacecraft. Project 921-2, Chinese Space Lab, Chinese Permanent Space Station. All of that's been accomplished. And there's the Chinese Lunar Exploration Program. Well, first phase has been accomplished. That was orbiting. Second phase was launched with an actual landing of rovers on the moon. A third phase was launched in will be launched in 2017 with an automated moon landing and return with samples, and a fourth phase lunar program will be launched in 2024, a manned mission with permanent lunar bases. There will be a Chinese exploration of Mars. The Yinghe 1 orbiter was launched in November 2011, and the joint Phobos Grunt mission with Russia, but it failed to leave Earth orbit and underwent a destructive re-entry. Further planned missions include rover landers and possible crewed missions to Mars in the future. And at any rate, we go through some of the discussions about how that is going to be done. A brief comment on U.S. imperialism against China in space. The PRC is a member of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and a signatory to all United Nations treaties and conventions on space, with the exception of the unpopular 1979 Moon Treaty. The U.S. government has long been resistant to the use of PRC launch services. Financial retaliatory measures have been taken on many occasions against several Chinese space companies. The U.S. has directed its space agency counterpart to adopt a strict Chinese exclusion policy. Thus, workers from the U.S. NASA are prohibited from working with Chinese citizens affiliated with Chinese state enterprises or entities, and Chinese nationals are barred from entering NASA facilities. Who completes the water diversion plan? Now that's the next thing I wanted to bring up here for as one of the 6 examples of what was accomplished. Now the South-North Water Transfer Project, also called the South to North Water Diversion Project, is a multi-decade infrastructure mega project in the PRC that aims to channel 45 billion cubic meters of fresh water annually from the Yangtze River in southern China to the more arid and industrialized north through 3 canal systems. And then I go through the eastern route, the central route, the western route, how all of that's being done. All of the details are in your book, but I guess the important thing is, as of this moment, the party just announced a few days ago that 70% of all of the water being used in Beijing is coming from this Shanghai River Water Diversion Project, south to north. And since we have different purposes to accomplish in the lectures, and this mainly is to elucidate the principal points of what's in your book, I'm going to let that water diversion project stand right there, and we'll move on to the next project. Our next thing I've chosen to point out was the explosion of China's new film industry. Now, in its history, the cinema of China is one of 3 distinct historical threads of Chinese language cinema, together with the cinema of Hong Kong and the cinema of Taiwan. Cinema began in China in 1896, and the first Chinese film, The Battle of Jingshan, was made in 1905. The film industry had its Hollywood in Shanghai in the 20th century, and the pattern of silent to talkie movies was the same in Shanghai as in Los Angeles. The first sound film, Sing Song Girl Red Peony, was made in 1931. The 1930s overall were considered the first golden period of Chinese cinema, which saw the advent of the leftist cinematic movement, and the fight between Chiang Kai-shek's fascists and the communists is reflected in the films produced. Now, of special interest to us is the career of Lan Ping, which is Chinese for Blue Apple. That was the stage name for Jiang Qing, or Chang Qing, or Madame Mao, Mao Zedong's 4th and final and most famous wife. She was born on March 19, 1914, and died on May 14, 1991, and she began her professional life as a movie actress. She was the famous 4th wife of Mao Zedong, who, as you know, was the chairman of the Communist Party and first paramount leader of modern China. She used the stage name Lan Ping during her acting career, as I just mentioned. Jiang Qing was born in Zhucheng, Shandong Province on March 19, 1914. Her birth name was Li Shengming. She was the only child of Li Diwan, a carpenter, and his subsidiary wife, or concubine. Her father ran his own carpentry and cabinet making shop. After Jiang's parents had a violent argument, her mother found work as a domestic servant and separated from her husband. When Jiang enrolled in elementary school, she took the name Li Yunhe, meaning Queen in the Clouds. Now, due to her low-class status and the fact that she was an illegitimate child, her schoolmates looked down upon her. She and her mother moved in with her maternal grandparents when she started middle school. In 1926, when she was 12 years old, her father died. Her mother relocated them to Tianjin, where Jiang worked as a child laborer in a cigarette factory for several months. And in May 1931, she returned to Jinan and married Pei Minglun, a wealthy son of a businessman. The marriage was an unhappy one, and they soon divorced. From July of 31 through April of 33, Jiang attended Qingdao University in Qingdao. She met Yu Qiwei, a physics student, 3 years her senior, who was a secret underground member of the Communist Party propaganda department. By 1932, they had fallen in love and were living together. She joined the Communist Cultural Front, a circle of artists, writers, and actors, and performed in Put Down Your Whip, a renowned popular play about a woman who escapes from Japanese-occupied northeastern China and performs in the streets to survive. In February 1933, Jiang took the oath of the CPC with Yu at her side, and she was appointed member of the Chinese Communist Party Youth Wing. In April of 33, Yu was arrested and Jiang shunned by his family, so she fled to her parents' home and returned to the drama school in Jinan. Through friendships she had previously established, she received an introduction to attend Shanghai University for the summer, where she also taught some general literacy classes. In October of 33, she rejoined the Communist Youth League, and she then began participating in an amateur drama troupe. In 1934, Jiang and her mother settled in Jinan, and the following summer she entered an experimental theater and drama school. Her talent brought her to the attention of administrators who selected her to join a drama club in Beijing, where she advanced her acting skills. In September 1934, Jiang Jing was arrested in Shanghai and jailed for her political activities. In December of 34, she was released and then traveled to Beijing, where she reunited with Yu Qiwei, who had just been released following his prison sentence. The two began living together again. In March of 35, Jiang Qing returned to Shanghai, becoming a professional movie actress, adopting the stage name Lan Ping, which, as we've seen, means blue apple, and she appeared in numerous films and plays, including God of Liberty, The Scenery of the City, Blood on Wolf Mountain, and Old Mr. Wang. In Ibsen's play A Doll's House, Jiang Qing played the role of Nora. Femme fatale. With her career established, she became involved with actor-director Tang Na, with whom she appeared in Scenes of City Life and the Statue of Liberty. They were married in Hangzhou in March 1936, which, by the way, is where this upcoming G20 meeting is going to be held. However, he soon discovered she was continuing a relationship with Yu Qiwei. The scandal became public knowledge, and he made 2 suicide attempts before their divorce became final. In 1937, Jiang joined the Green Gang, Lianshu Film Company, and starred in the film Big Thunderstorm. She reportedly had an affair with director Zhang Min. This she denies in her autobiographical articles. Big-eared Du, as boss of the Green Gang, soon became infatuated with her, and she feared his intentions, which she should have. Following the Marco Polo Bridge incident on July 7, 1937, and the Japanese invasion of Shanghai, which destroyed much of its movie industry, Jiang abandoned her celebrity life on the stage and fled the city, where Du was already making her uncomfortable, to say the least. First she ran to Xi'an, and from there she made her way to the Chinese Communist headquarters in Yan'an to join the revolution and the war against Japanese invasion. With Mao. In November 1937, she enrolled in the Counter-Japanese Military and Political University, Marxist-Leninist Institute, for study. The Luzon Academy of Arts was newly founded in Yan'an on April 10, 1938, and Jiang Jing became a drama department instructor, teaching and performing in college plays and operas. She married Mao Zedong in Yan'an in November 1938. Afterwards, she served a ceremonial role as the inaugural First Lady of the People's Republic of China. You may recall she had been barred by the CPC from playing any role in the party other than those devoted to cultural matters, as a condition of the party's approval of Mao's decision to marry her. She did serve as a personal secretary after their marriage and through the 1940s. It wasn't unusual then for the party to oversee and approve people's marriages or try to stop them. I know the CPUSA tried to stop the marriage of my marriage to my wife, sent out a whole delegation, Gus Hall did, to Los Angeles to confer with her and her parents about it. Not that it did him any good. In 1965, Mao decided to use her in his political fight against modern revisionism. Jiang Jing was head of the film section of the Communist Party's propaganda department in the 1950s. Now, the Shanghai movie industry evacuates. After the Japanese invasion of China and the occupation of Shanghai, the industry in the city was largely destroyed. Filmmakers moved to Hong Kong, Chongqing, and other cities trying to start over again, and this is now called the Solitary Island period in Shanghai because there were still a few filmmakers working there in the city's foreign concession. Princess Iron Fan was released in 1931. The first Chinese animated feature film was made there and released at the end of this period. Cinema in the PRC. Now, after the end of the war, a second golden age took place with production in Shanghai resuming, with films such as Spring in a Small Town, 1948, named the best Chinese language film at the 24th Hong Kong Film Awards. After the Communist Revolution in 1949, movie attendance increased sharply. After the founding of the People's Republic, Jiang became the nation's First Lady, and she worked as director of film in the Central Propaganda Department and as a member of the Ministry of Culture Steering Committee for the film industry. An uproar in 1950 led to the investigation of The Life of Wu Zun, a film about the 19th century beggar who raised money to educate the poor. Jiang supported criticism of the film for celebrating counter-revolutionary ideas. Following the Great Leap Forward of 58 to 61, Mao turned to Jiang as a cultural leader and movie maker to support him in his war with modern revisionism. Jiang began by reforming the Chinese theater. In 1963, Mao led an initiative for reforming modern opera that resulted in the eight model revolutionary operas and established at the Peking Opera, which she was behind, she organized. Her guidance defined works of drama, music, dance, and other arts appropriate to the struggle against modern revisionism. The industry flourished following the end of the Cultural Revolution again, including the scar dramas of the 1980s, such as Evening Rain, Legend of Ten Yun Mountain, and Hibiscus Town, released in 1980 and 1986, respectively, depicting the emotional traumas left by the period, starting in the mid to late 80s with films such as 1 in 8 and Yellow Earth, released in 83 and 84. The fifth generation of filmmakers brought increased popularity to Chinese cinema abroad. At first, this was mainly among Western art house audiences. And I remember going to one of these art theaters in Los Angeles to see a Chinese movie in those years. But eventually, they began to take off in a more commercially successful way. Films like Red Sorghum in 87, The Story of Qin Zhu in 92, and Farewell My Concubine in 93 won major international awards. The Jiang Zemin administration witnessed the beginning of the rise of the sixth and seventh generation of filmmakers and actors. Maturity meant for China what it had for Hollywood, namely that films are often made outside of the main Chinese film system. This has meant collaboration between Hollywood and Chinese moguls in the motion picture industry of all types on both ends. Cinema under the Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping administrations. The international commercial success of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in 10,000 and Hero in 2002 immediately meant that the number of co-productions of the Chinese language cinema exploded. There had been a movement of Chinese language cinema into the domain of tentpole international status. The Dream Factory 97 demonstrated the viability of the tentpole commercial model in China, as well as the USA, because of the exponential growth of the Chinese box office. Chinese films have now break box office records, and as of January 2016, 5 of the top 10 highest grossing films in China are domestic productions. And I noticed a few minutes ago, Xinhua announced that Wanda, China's biggest filmmaker, has just released $2 billion US for production of films this year alone. Lost in Thailand 2012 was the first Chinese film to reach a 1 billion yuan, and 1 yuan at that time was about 8 per US dollars, to reach a 1 billion yuan box office amount. And then Monster Hunt in 2015 was the first to reach 2 billion yuan, and The Mermaid in 2016 was the first to reach 3 billion, and is currently the highest grossing film in China. The world's largest film studio is Hongdu World Studios, and in 2010 it had the third largest film industry by number of feature films produced every year. In 2012, the country became the second largest market in the world by box office receipts. In 2015, the gross box office in China was over 44 billion yuan, or that's almost 7 billion US dollars, with domestic films having a share of 62%. The country by next year, 2017, will be the largest market in the world, and by 2017 China will have the largest number of screens in the world. Naturally, China has become a major hub of business for Hollywood studios. All right, I'm going to just take a few moments to mention that, as you know, the 2008 Olympic Games were held. Construction there began in 2003, was pretty well done by 2007, and finally 31 Beijing-based Olympic Games venues were underway and ready to go for the 2008 Olympic Games. This got a tremendous international attention. It had a total cost of 2.1 billion US dollars, or 17.4 billion yuan, and these events were held outside of Beijing as well, in a number of cities, and got international attention. So, I don't know, I watched the opening ceremonies there, and I was pretty impressed, and I imagine many of you did also. So, when it was all said and done, the cost of the entire thing was probably about 15 billion US dollars. The Bird's Nest Stadium alone cost 423 million US dollars and was funded by state-owned corporate conglomerates and the Beijing State-Owned Assets Management Company. And the budget easily accommodated the unemployed arising from the planned shutdown of inefficient state enterprises of that time. And the event gave the CPC a feather in its cap, in addition to the great international impression the spectacular opening ceremony gave the world. And I want to go over just briefly the Mausoleum of the Tomb of China, Qin's first emperor, part because I had just become aware of it. This picture of this particular tomb was obtained for me from the Chinese government in 1975 by Frank Pistana on one of the 45 round trips he made back and forth as head of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association. He got that for me from the Chinese government, and we were able to use it as one of the 4 pictures of the cover of my 1976 textbook. All of this archaeology was getting a tremendous amount of attention for China in the scientific community, especially the archaeological community around the world, and it included here, of course. Well, I'm not going to go through all of the details of this because we're running out of time, and I think the important thing is You've all seen pictures, because if nothing else, you saw the third Mummy movie, which is filmed in the tomb with the first emperor's terracotta soldiers. But I want to make one real quick point here, which is important to Marxists, and that is, prior to this particular tomb being constructed, when a king of one of the warring states, for example, the period preceding the 221 unification of China, when a king died, all of his retainers were buried alive with him. Now, this philosophy of that period was called Confucianism. The emperor of China, this first emperor, the one who gave China its name, Qin, or Qin, was a legalist. The difference is, Confucianism was a philosophy of slave owners. Legalism was a philosophy of serf owners. And this new guy coming in was demonstrating a different kind of respect for retainers of all kinds. Soldiers, bureaucrats, concubines, or whatever. So they're modeled in terracotta instead of being live people put in there. Now that was an important thing for Marxists to learn. We learned about that in practice with the excavation of this particular tomb. And it was important to me in my analysis of the rise of feudalism in the earlier chapters of this book. Having said all of that, I'll just make a few interesting comments. The discovery was based on the fact that in 1974, in the spring, first few fragments of these terracotta warriors, along with some bronze arrowheads, were discovered while farmers were digging a water well in Ziyang, a village in Lintong County. At a depth of around 2 meters, the farmers found hardened dirt, then red earthenware, fragments of terracotta, bronze arrowheads, and terracotta bricks. And at first, the working farmers just threw these fragments of terracotta in the corner of the field, and then collected the arrowheads to sell them to a commercial agency, and other villagers came around and took terracotta bricks to make pillows. A manager in charge of the hydraulic works named Fang Shumiao came to the village and, seeing the objects found, told the villagers they should consider selling them to the cultural center of the district, which they did, and the farmers whose land it was received 10 yuan for 2 carts of fragments. These fragments turned out to be from the now famous terracotta warriors. Now, questioning the peasants, Zhao Kangmin, responsible of the cultural center, came to the village, investigated, and bought everything the villagers uncovered, repurchasing the arrowheads they had sold to a commercial agency. So that's the history of how this came to the party's attention in Beijing. Well, in May of '74, a few months later, a team of archaeologists was dispatched from Shanxi to go to and undertake the first excavations of what was known as Pit Number 1, and then I go through the history of this business, and then I also pointed out that I received a photo of this excavated princess's jade burial suit. Again, you can kind of see it here, maybe, from the PRC government, thanks to Frank Pastana. I used it as one of the montage of photos on my hard copy textbook, Foundations of Archaeology, Glencoe Press, Beverly Hills, 1976, 765 pages. Now, the excavation spread across an area of 20,000 square meters, producing about 7,000 statues of terracotta warriors and horses. And, well, I go through more of this business. And I go through more of the discussion of the entire business of what this significance is with regard to Marxist theory. And in conclusion, in December 2012, at the conclusion of the Hu Jintao administration, it was announced that the remains of a massive imperial palace were found at the site. Based on its foundations, the courtyard-style palace was estimated to be 690 meters long and 250 meters wide, covering an area of 170,000 square meters, which is nearly 1/4 the size of the Forbidden City in Beijing. The palace included 18 courtyard homes and a main building that overlooked the houses, and the archaeologists have been excavating the foundations there since 2010. and they've found the walls, gates, stone roads, pottery shards, and brickwork. And this is a project that's going to go on indefinitely. So you can see from these selected examples what the Jintao administration accomplished, which was a hell of a lot. And it laid the basis for an even more successful administration that is currently following it. And we will talk about that in the next lecture.